Hey, welcome to the ISM Rochester webinar series, and this is our February 17th program. Just wanted to let everybody know on March 11th, we're going to be having our membership meeting. Details will be emailed out to everybody. March 17th, we're actually going to talk about certifications and degrees, how to stay in demand. So one program note for tonight, just please be sure to ask any questions, and please ask questions, definitely ask questions. Use the Q&A tab or the chat function, which should be located at the bottom of the screen. Now tonight, I'm very happy that we have these two special guests. They will be speaking on sourcing for logistics services, insights from the Logistics Manager Index. Our first speaker is Stephen Carnovale. He is a professor of supply chain management at the Saunders College of Business at the Rochester Institute of Technology. I'm sure some of our viewers probably know him already. And our second speaker is someone I've worked with before, is Dr. Zach Rogers. He is an assistant professor of operations and supply chain management at Colorado State University. At this time, I'm going to turn the program over because I know they have quite an agenda planned for today.
All right.
Thanks.
Well, hey, thanks, Kathy. It's good to be here with everybody on the East Coast this evening. Steve, you guys are all right in Steve's backyard, but I'm a couple time zones away. But I'm happy to be here. And Steven and I are both researchers for something called the Logistics Managers Index. And I'll throw the title screen up here for everybody. And the Logistics Managers Index, for those of you who aren't familiar, is something where we essentially look at movements in the logistics industry. And here's kind of what it looks like. So it's a change index or a diffusion index. So for those of you who are familiar with the PMI, it works very similarly, where, you know, if something is declining, like say inventory levels, warehousing prices from month to month, we'll get a number under 50. If it's increasing, we'll get a number above 50. And I just kind of want to, you know, we're going to introduce everything we're going to do in a second here. Just before we do any of that, though, I just wanted everybody to sort of see what this looks like, what it is, and where all this data is going to be coming from, because we're going to keep referring back as we go to, oh, well, the index score for transportation price is an 81 or something like that. And I want to make sure we all kind of know where that's coming from. So this is the survey. Every month we have a couple hundred folks take it. And essentially what we ask is, okay, inventory levels, are they the same in February as they were in January? Declining, increasing? Add all those up together. A score above 50 means growth. The further above 50 it is, the greater the growth rate is. The further below 50 it is, the greater contraction. We've had quite a few people take this in the 4 years we've been doing this, right around 4,700 respondents, and we look at things like transportation, warehousing, inventory, etc. So, Steve, before we get going and we really dive into everything we're going to do today, do you want to introduce anything? Do you want to say anything about what we're going to talk about?
Yeah, the only one thing I would add to what Zach is saying is that when we started talking about this some 4 or 5 years ago, the whole point of it was to think about being a complement to the PMI, in the sense that one is materials driven and it's one portion of the supply chain, but the logistics activity, be it transportation, be it warehousing, or whatnot, inventory, that is a whole different element of the supply chain. So, you know, where one falls, the other kind of picks up the slack. And I think that's the vantage point that we think about the LMI. It's to kind of supplement other indices out there that explain supply chain management activity more generally.
Right. And the idea behind this is that we can use LMI metrics to sort of, one, see what's going on at a very macro level. Okay, and that's the first important piece, because I know, when I was at Amazon and I was in a warehouse, I was an operations manager at a warehouse. I knew a lot about what was happening in my one warehouse. I didn't know a lot about the whole network. I didn't know a lot about, van prices in the Southeast or something. I was on the West Coast. And so we try to give everybody, one, a big overview of everything that's going on. But two, we think that this can be a leading indicator. And it has been in the past. We've run some analyses, and Steve is the real statistical wizard of the two of us. And he could tell you the LMI is pretty good at predicting, like January's LMI is pretty good at predicting February's economic activity in terms of retail sales, unemployment rates, returns, all kinds of these, these sort of Dow Jones index.
Dow Jones, yeah.
Dow Jones, that's the other one. If you want to know what's going to happen in March, look at February's logistics activity. And if we think about why, I mean, it really makes sense. So in order for something to be, purchased, right? So we have the transaction that'll go into GDP or whatever. First, it has to be put into position to be purchased. And so it has to be put on a truck somewhere, it has to be stored in inventory, maybe in a warehouse, maybe in a store. All of that activity, that sort of pre-sale activity, that pre-customer activity, is captured here in the logistics index. We put it out every month for free. And it's usually a pretty good way to sort of see what's coming. And so we're going to look at the most recent index. So today we're going to look at the most recent index. We're going to look at how things have changed over the last year, because this has been a truly, just wild year. If you're looking at the trucking industry, if you're looking at inventory levels, as I'm sure, all you are purchasing folks, I'm sure you are familiar with. And sort of we can look at it today, so now it's February, right? And this pandemic started in March. So now we're a year away. We can see sort of what happened, what the reasons for some of that have been, what the fallout of some of that has been, and sort of where we see this going over the next 12 months, over the next year, and how it'll affect folks like you with all this change. All right, so let's get going then. All right, so if we look at inventories over the last year, they've been moving all over the place like crazy, and that's for a couple reasons. One, there was the shutdown that we had right at the beginning of the pandemic. If you were someone who sold, I don't know if you guys remember, the shutdown happened like March 13th or something like that. So if you were selling either, spring clothing lines, chicken wings, or non-canned beer, you were in big trouble, right when this happened, because it was, the week before spring break and March Madness, all the spring lines were coming out. And so we had a bunch of inventory just that didn't move, right? Everything immediately just stopped all of a sudden. And on the other side of that, so because everything stops, we had a big slowdown in terms of inbound traffic from China, okay, and from other places as well. But looking at just China going through the port of Los Angeles, we saw big slowdowns early in the pandemic. Well, when things are coming back online, those slowdowns go away, and now we're in this sort of place where volume going through the port of Los Angeles has never been higher. They had the Q3 and Q4 were their biggest Q3 and Q4 they've ever had in the 114 years that we've been tracking shipments through the port of LA. And you can kind of see why that happened from this picture right here. The blue line is 2019. The orange line is 2020. Rather the blue line is 2019. The orange line is 2020. And you can see early in the year, imports really lagged. And that was, it started early because China shut down first, right? So China shuts down and the US shuts down. And so there's sort of this double whammy for the first 6 months of the year. We're way below what we would normally have coming through the port of Los Angeles. You look at Q3 and Q4 though, and you start to see we're like, over 100,000 TEUs different than what was coming through in 2020. And that's not something that slowed down. I think there was some thought that, we were going to get through Q4, we're going to get through the holidays, and there's going to be, okay, very high demand, e-commerce is way up, but then, okay, we'll get to the other side of Q4 and then things will slow back down again. That didn't happen. If we look at February, and this is, I grabbed this off the Port of Los Angeles, if we look at February, this week is up 83% from the same week last year. And for the next 2 weeks, up 370, up 270. All right. And so the volume coming through is huge. And there's a couple things behind this. One, we're still catching up. Companies are still on backlog from all the inventory that we missed in the first 6 months of the year. We missed inventory coming in for 6 months of the year because we have to make that up, as well as the inventory that would normally be coming in. I'm talking to people who don't think we're going to be all the way caught up for 9 to 12 months, sort of it's starting in August or July. So maybe it's going to take another 6 to 12 months from now for us to totally catch up in the ports. Okay. And you even see companies canceling shipments because they're like, well, it's just going to sit there anyway. I might as well wait until April or May, maybe when something opens up a little. And so we see this big sort of race to catch up. And what that's doing is it's filling up warehouses, filling up trucks, filling up trains, boats, planes, all the way through the system from, LA, all the way back into China. And if we look at it, because we're at, you can see this number down here in the corner, 5 days that an inbound container just waits to get through the terminal. Normally that's 2 days. All right, so 5 days to get through the terminal. Because of that, we're seeing big increases in Georgia, Oakland, in Seattle. We're seeing boats redirected towards Mexico, and then they're getting put on a train to go back up to the US. And it's not just on the US side. The slowdown on the US side means empty containers are going to be slower coming back to China. Empty containers being slow on the way back means that now there's nothing to fill up, right? You can't just put a bunch of shoes on a boat. You got to put them in a container before you can send them over here. And so now we're losing time on both sides of the Pacific. And so it's turning into this sort of feedback loop where because we're late in LA, we're late in Beijing and Shanghai. And because we're late in Shanghai and Beijing, we're late in LA again. And it's turning into this feedback loop where the snake's kind of eating its tail. And this is aggravated by a couple things. One, there's been a secondary breakout both in LA and China, right? Port of Los Angeles has had 700 people infected since November, December, January. So that's causing a slowdown on that side. On the Chinese side, the city of Dalian has had an outbreak, which for those of you who are familiar with Chinese geography, you'll know Dalian's in the north, and a lot of goods come from north to south, and they ship out of southern ports in China. And because of the outbreak, a lot of river traffic has been slowed down. And so you can't even get everything out of China at the speed you would normally get out of. It's so bad over there that everyone essentially worked through the Lunar New Year last week. Normally you see a big dip in February because of the Lunar New Year. Not this year. It would be like all of us working through, Christmas, Hanukkah, all the big holidays in December. They're just working straight through in China because of how far behind they are. And all of this is choking supply chains with lots and lots of inventory. Steve, I don't know if you wanted to jump in or say anything.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. The biggest point that comes across both in the data that we've seen, so if you go to thelmi.org or .com, you'll be able to see it. But that initial shock that happened in March, the amplifying effect that it had and the circularity that it had in terms of coming back, Zach hit it on the head. We're still seeing it happen. I mean, if you take a look, which we're going to talk about in a little bit with warehousing, it's been insane. As we write the report every month, we're writing and hypothesizing, okay, well, maybe it's because everybody's getting ready for the e-commerce season and they're filling up inventories. And then after the e-commerce season went by, we said, well, maybe they're waiting for the next e-commerce season. It's really remarkable. And the way I think about it in my head is it's kind of like at a toll booth. If you had this steady flow going down the throughway and all of a sudden it just stopped for a month, think about the rippling effect that would have downstream. And that's what we're seeing. So no, I think you hit the nail on the head with that, Zach.
This is what I like about talking to East Coast people, by the way. We don't have toll booths in Colorado. So I like this fun, exotic analogies you guys make out here. All right. So just like Steve mentioned, we saw quite a few causes behind this. And one of the things we thought maybe, right, was causing us back up was e-commerce. And not for nothing, by the way, we thought e-commerce was a big piece of it. If you look at e-commerce over the last year, it was predicted to grow about 15% in 2020. The rate of e-commerce just in the US. Instead, it went up about 45%. Okay, and Christmas, Q4, all that was huge. And it's interesting because it was a big spike, but not a spike in the way that I think some were anticipating. So if you look at this chart we put together here, you can see that that Prime Day and Thanksgiving, right? Sort of the Thanksgiving weekend, so Cyber Monday, Black Friday, all that stuff. It did jump up quite a bit. We went from $17 billion in commerce on Thanksgiving to 25 billion. That's a huge jump, right? That's 30-something% jump. People were hoping for more, honestly, because if you look at what happened in China, it went from 38 billion to 75 billion on Singles Day. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with Singles Day is basically where you buy something for yourself. And this is like a holiday essentially that Alibaba just made up like 10 years ago, and it's become hugely successful. And they always have it, just in case anyone wants to throw this out at a party later. They always have this on November 11th. And the reason they have it on November 11th is because when you write the date for November 11th, it looks like this. Oh, here we go. This is how you write the date for November 11th, 11/11. And I guess this reminds the people at Alibaba, at least, of a barren tree that doesn't have any fruit on it. And that's how they think of you if you don't have a girlfriend over there. And so they think, hey, you're an empty tree. Why don't you buy yourself a pair of shoes or something? And lo and behold, you get $75 billion in one day. So we didn't see that same sort of 100% spike in a single day here. What we saw here was, okay, fell short of expectations, but that's because instead of Black Friday, we essentially had Black Fall. And what we mean by that is that the online demand, the peak of online demand was really smoothed out. Instead of having we got one big giant spike, we had it was like the curve went up basically. And so every day throughout the fall, just like really every day throughout 2020, we saw heightened demand for e-commerce and delivery. A lot of people couldn't go to stores. Some people just got used to the convenience of ordering everything online. I know I didn't used to order groceries on my phone, but now it's like a grocery store. Why would I ever go back in one of those again? It's like walking into a bank. I never am going to walk into a bank again. Why would I ever go to a grocery store? And it's the same, I think, for a lot of folks around the world. And as we know, as probably everybody on this call knows, e-commerce leads and needs greater logistics infrastructure to work, right? If we're all going to the store, the retailer, right? We're all going to some retailer. If we're all going to a storefront, what do they need? Well, they need a distribution center somewhere out in the middle of the desert, like one that I used to work at out in the middle of nowhere by, wild horses and cows and stuff. A couple, big truckloads, full truckloads going to retail stores. And then the consumer does the rest. Think about e-commerce. You can't just have one warehouse out in the desert because everybody expects next and same day delivery. So you got to have a bunch of fulfillment centers all over the place. So you need more warehousing, preferably warehousing that's close to consumers. And you need vans or LTL or whatever kind of shipments going all over the place. And so the logistics infrastructure necessary, the number of trucks, the number of warehouses that's necessary for e-commerce is a lot higher than it is for brick and mortar. And look at this slide. E-commerce went up 45% last year when we were expecting it to go up 15%. And so essentially last year, e-commerce grew by about 3 years in 9 months. 3 years and 9 months. So all this infrastructure that we need wasn't there. And so we have to start catching up on this. And like we're going to show you on the next slide, it's really led to a spike in costs and a real lack of capacity. So Steve, I'm gonna flip forward for you on this slide here. And
Yeah.
I saw something in the QA here.
Yeah, Connor, one of my students actually is curious about.
Nice. You got your students coming to this?
Yeah, I got a couple. It looks like. Hey guys, nice to see everybody. Yeah, so Connor's question is about whether or not we could do it more frequently than a monthly basis. And I think it would be great if we could get like a pulse survey out and get it every week. But the balancing act for us is we'd like to have the people who participate continue to participate, and we don't want to overwhelm their inbox probably. Right. If we had thousands and thousands and thousands, we might take a subset. And one day we might, right, Zach? I mean, one day we might have such a big pool that we could just randomly select 100 people and do a pulse weekly survey. But yeah, go ahead.
No, one day we will, and we'll sell it for $44 billion like they sold the PMI. That's the plan, Connor. Right now we're doing it. Right now we're doing this for free in our spare time. But so having the monthly movements, I think gives us a bigger picture. But of course, we would like to break it down, even if it's not weekly, a little more by industry, a little more by geography. And we have some of those numbers internally. The problem is just, consistently getting a big sample size in, say, Atlanta to compare to Chicago, right? Yeah. We know some weeks or some months we'll get a bunch of respondents from Atlanta, a bunch from Chicago. But then if the next month Atlanta's slow coming in, then we can't keep making those same comparisons. So that's a great question, Connor. And eventually, once you're graduated and we hire you to be our research assistant, and you can send all the emails out, I'd be happy to. I'll do this every day. I'm fine with that too.
Connor's going to Deloitte, so he's already busy. But
Connor, in our defense, we'll pay less and the hours will be worse. so up to you.
We got that going for you. Yeah, so basically, all right, so Zach really set the stage exceptionally well, as he does, given that he's in this day in and day out. And I think, from my vantage point, I've always been more on the sourcing side of things generally. So what does all this have to do with procurement professionals and how they can think about leveraging it for insight? And that was really the whole point, right? Is if you have the PMI that indicates what's going on at one portion of the supply chain for materials and things like that, we're looking at the other side, the outbound supply. We're trying to indicate something is going to be a leading indicator of economic activity, which our data show that it is. The crazy part about all this, in my case, looking at it from the warehousing standpoint in particular, is that if you were following this month by month and you saw what happened March, no one could really figure out what was going on. But if you look at what happened in April, and then you saw it again in May, and you required warehousing space or any portion of your business had e-commerce, it was starting to shift, this would be a tool to let you know things are going to continue to contract. If you take a look at on the slide that Zach has up there right now, I think that's blue, if I can see correctly.
Yeah, it's dark. Yeah, dark blue there.
So the dark blue line that is rapidly descending beneath the 50 mark. The 50 mark is basically neither increasing nor decreasing. It's level. We rapidly saw a contraction from the peak all the way down, and it was just nuts. And so that was the first thing, right? So how do we take this data and do we leverage it in terms of insight? It's predictive in the sense that there's a lag to it. And that's in warehousing in particular, there's been a 1 to 2 month lag with respect to the impact that capacity of warehousing has on the pricing and the utilization. Typically, utilization and capacity, they trend 1-to-1 with each other. If one's down, the other one's going to be up, right? So if I have lower capacity, utilization will tend to be up. But if we think about what warehousing actually is, well, it's physical capacity, it's space. You can't just snap your fingers and automatically have, a physical infrastructure. So we saw this lag. So I think there's a similar pattern that manifests itself with all the other indicators, right? Because remember, from the standpoint that we're focused on, we're looking at inventory levels, we're looking at transportation, and we're looking at warehousing. So these all taken together, of course, form the logistics manager's index. But if I'm in the context of a procurement professional looking to manage supply risk and hedge against variability in terms of availability, there's a lot to pull out of the LMI. Pricing in particular is a tool that, or is a measure we can look at to hedge, right? If inventory levels and costs and transportation prices are going up and we're transportation dependent, it might be a tool to leverage in terms of a futures contract. If warehousing capacity or physical space becomes something that's required, this also could be a tool in order to engage in a longer term contract to lock up that space ahead of time. So from my vantage point, I think the LMI, it's fascinating for us that we've been looking at it for all these years at a macro level, like Zach said initially. But then you can take it and you can funnel it down and discretize it to a point where you're looking at it with a really good degree of precision. And you're saying, okay, if there's a 2-month lag on the relationship between capacity and price, and I see 2 months in a row of sliding capacity, there's a likelihood that's very high that the next month's pricing is going to continue to go up. So this is how I envision it. Zach, I don't know if you want to comment any further on maybe how to connect it to sourcing, but that's, I think, the slam dunk in my mind.
Absolutely. And one thing I should point out about this graph here is that these are all month-to-month readings. Okay, so if you look at that dark blue line, that warehouse capacity line, you see it's been below 50 since June. So just because it's slightly closer to the black line, it looks like it goes up, right? December, I think, to January, it went from a 39 to a 46. That doesn't mean there's more warehouses in January than December. There's actually less warehouses in January and December. All this is a rate of change, not a cumulative level, okay? So if December, the line was pointed down, right? We're going down like this. In January, we're still going down. It just wasn't quite as steep, okay? So that's what it means. Anytime it's below black means contraction. So there's been less warehouse capacity available every single month we've asked since June 20th. Now, June 2020. So that's tough. And you can see there's been a corresponding increase in warehouse utilization, so what we're using. But also look at the purple line. Look at inventory costs, right? And this is, the cost to hold inventory is directly tied, of course, to the cost of a warehouse, how many warehouses are around. And so warehouses, right? Warehouses are going up here. Warehouse capacity is down and inventory costs keep going up every single month. And it's interesting because if you look at the little yellow line, which is inventory levels has stayed, a fairly steady rate of growth. I mean, it's growing, but the rate of growth isn't increasing at the same rate that inventory cost is increasing. And what this probably represents is that we're really hitting a critical threshold here in terms of available warehouses where we're just full. We're full of warehouses, and specifically, like Steve mentioned, it's not just that it's hard to build warehouses. It's hard to build the warehouses that people are looking for, because everybody's looking for a warehouse that's 20 minutes away from a major urban center, right? They want to build them in the suburbs of Buffalo or Rochester or Denver or wherever, not out in the middle of some rural area. So not only is it hard to get a warehouse built, like it takes time, but it's also hard to get the ones you want built because there's a very limited space. I mean, we're trying to infill old Kmart's and stuff as fast as we can go, but there's just not enough, hollowed out Sears or whatever that are sitting there ready to be distribution centers. Because of that, because that blue line has been so low for so long, this purple line, inventory costs are now going up at a faster rate than inventory levels. And what we're seeing is as inventory comes in, there's an increasing marginal cost to holding each unit of inventory. And all that means is each piece of inventory that comes in is more expensive to hold than the last piece that came in. It's a marginal increase in cost. Now, excuse me, we can look at this and we can see that probably because of the increased cost of inventory, figuring out a way to either postpone inventory to the future or to figure out some sort of sharing shared warehouse on demand thing, right? Like a Flex or a service like that, or figuring out how to do a maybe long-term warehousing contract, or maybe if you think this is going to go back up, do spot market stuff. Although we look at future predictions and our respondents aren't predicting that warehouse prices are going to go down anytime soon. You can think about using this information to do those forward buys and plan out strategically, just like Steve was talking. The next picture I want to show you, you're going to see this line come back when you look at transportation and warehouse capacity. And you can see both of them have been below 50 pretty consistently all summer here. And there's a couple of reasons for this. So we just talked about warehousing, so we don't need to get that much into it again. Transportation, interestingly, has been even worse. And because it's the use of the spot market, because it's so hard to find a truck, spot market usage is up like 25, 45%. And Steve, I don't know about you, but I'm talking to a lot of firms around here, at least, who their spot market prices are up 80 to 100% for transportation this year.
Yeah, I haven't heard that high, but I have heard increases, and it's been manifest in the data.
So yeah, specifically, I should say the spot market prices I've heard about are sea freight being up 100%. Container rates right now are like 170% of what they were last year. But yeah, like dry van and stuff like that, it's in the 20. It's only up 25% or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, prices are still high. Now, part of this was that firms didn't want to add capacity in the early part of the pandemic because we thought maybe, remember there was people going on TV saying, "Oh, it'll be over by Easter. We're all going to go back to church for Easter." Well, maybe Easter 2022, we're all going to go back. But so because of that, and because of how many, if you remember, it was a bad time to be a small carrier in late 2019, early 2020. We had fleets shutting down all over the place, partly because we had way overbuilt when the economy was really hot in 2018. So remember, the tax cut happens on January 1st, 2018, that it's like pouring lighter fluid on the economy for 6 months there. And so we were building fleets like crazy. And then suddenly we have trade war stuff, natural slowdown cycles, and we see delivery and especially or transportation, especially flatbed, which is industrial, really slow down, and we see fleets shutting down all over the place. And so I think initially companies, when the pandemic started, were nervous, one, just about the pandemic and who knew what was going to happen, but two, that the increased demand for transportation was just going to be a flash in the pan, and they didn't want to overbuild. Well, now we're a year later and capacity is still declining. And because capacity is still declining, I'll show you prices here. Prices are still going up like crazy. So purple line here is transportation price. Teal line is warehouse price. Prices are still going up like crazy. And now we are seeing a lot of fleets start to come online. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, the thing about it, one of the most interesting things, if you just look at the way that the supply chain, generally speaking, has been impacted by COVID, you really start to learn what things are fungible and what things are non-fungible. And it's fascinating that something like milk isn't fungible, but to a large degree, transportation is. And despite all of that, the prices are still skyrocketing. A container is a container unless it needs to be refrigerated. They're still skyrocketing in terms of the pricing. And so, Zach's right. Is it 2022? Is it 20? Who knows what it's going to be? We've not seen a relent in the price or the decrease in capacity now. And, before this call, Zach and I were saying, I was thinking maybe at some point, there's going to be too many warehouses, and probably not, though. I think Zach's right. It's going to be wild to see what happens over the next year. Certainly that I think we can agree on. It's nuts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, if we think about what the fallout of these huge prices has been, so of course, all right, we have some stuff that's, you know, we have all these prices up like, you know, 25, 60%. Volumes for reefer and dry van up 100% at the end of last year. So all this crazy demand for trucks driving prices up like crazy. And again, I don't think we should understate how high these levels are. I mean, transportation prices right now are, this is just over the last year. Transportation price in January 2020 was an even 50. Didn't change from December to January. And transportation price tends to be the most dynamic of the 8 metrics we track. You know, warehouses, you might lock in a price for 3 years because you're on a contract. Transportation changes like every couple minutes, basically. And so because of that, transportation usually is, I think, the best indicator of sort of future activity, just if we're only looking at a single metric, because it's the one that moves the most easily and is the most sensitive to changes in demand. On average, over the 4.5 years we've been doing this, I think transportation price, the average is like, you know, 61, 60 is about the average level we get for it. It's been, you know, here's 80s. It's been in the 80s since July. And, you know, if we compare that to where it was a year ago it was at 50. And this month, well, January 21, the most recent data we have, it was at 81. And so the rate of growth has just been staggering. And it's making it really hard for companies to ship stuff anywhere. So if I was looking at this, now we're going to show you a slide in a minute that says transportation capacity is hopefully going to come online this year a little bit. But if I was looking at this could help, I think, inform me about the kind of moves I wanted to make in terms of booking things out into the future and really avoiding these spot markets. The spot market, look, it's up 106%. Tender rejection rates right now are really, really high. I mean, I look at, you know, truck to van requests, and there's parts of the country where it's 12-1. You know, for every 12 requests, we got one truck or you know, whatever it is. You know, looking at things like, do we want to lock in the capacity with a contract rate? Do we want to just keep using the spot market? And maybe spot market will be cheaper. I mean, who knows? And you know, right now that's an interesting tension, I think, between, do we lock this in because there's such limited capacity, but if we lock it in, are we locking ourselves into high prices? And so that's really kind of a tension, I think, right now firms have to try to navigate, and it's tricky. And you can see that clearly it's had a big impact on the freight companies themselves. If we look at, you know, sort of the mixed outcomes, you know, UPS had record revenues in 2021. Record, you know, up 21% in Q4. Revenue was $84 billion. At the same time, right, this comes out, and then a couple weeks later, they're selling their freight business. And at first, this seemed kind of weird. They said record revenues, and they're cutting off parts of their company. But if you look, the freight business, which they sold for $800 million, which essentially was, I mean, so far under market value for what they could have got for it. I mean, it generated $3.2 billion of revenue last year, and they got rid of it for $800 million. That's like when you have a garage sale and you're just like, just take the couch. I don't even want it. It's taking up room in my garage. My wife is mad at me. Please get it out of here. That's essentially what UPS did with their freight business. And the reason for that is because these numbers right here, 3.2 billion from freight in 2020 out of, let me draw that line a little straighter, out of 85 billion, okay? It's a drop in the bucket in terms of what it is they're doing. And so essentially they're moving away from business to business, LTL sort of shipments, and just focusing in on the consumer, because the consumer is where all the growth has been. You know, industrial's up a hair in January and February, but all this change is happening downstream where consumers are. And I mean, it's to the point that UPS has divested themselves essentially from their upstream business. And they just want to focus on boxes and trucks. They don't want to have anything to do with pallets anymore. They just want to have packages going to your house, making deliveries or whatever. And it's interesting because this move to LTL was really good if you were a highly capitalized firm. So I think these two graphs came out 3 days apart in the Wall Street Journal, and I think it's really interesting. So the graph to the left here, we can see trucking failures by quarter in the US. And you can see that obviously the first part of the year was pretty bad. In 2020, we lost over 3,100 fleets. Now, most of these fleets were like 10 trucks or less. And you have to remember, as much as we think of UPS or XPO or FedEx or something, 97% of the fleets in the US have 20 trucks or less, basically. Okay, so most of them are small, regional, kind of mom and pop carriers. It was a bad year for those guys. For the big guys, the ones who could sort of weather the storm in the spring, it was a great year. FedEx and UPS had huge earnings at the end of the year. And so did, Old Dominion, XPO, DHL in Europe. All these big guys had great years. And I think it's interesting for a couple reasons. One, it sort of explains what happened at capacity. We lost 3,100 fleets in 12 months, and most of those happened in 6 months. It's not. I don't think it's a coincidence that we have this huge, 1,500 fleets go down in Q2, and in July we start seeing sky high prices. If I'm FedEx or these guys, they're not necessarily in a hurry to bring a lot of capacity back online, or at least they weren't early on. And two, I think it's interesting just because it does show how COVID really sped up a lot of trends that were already happening, right? The move towards e-commerce, of course, there's more e-commerce now. We were going that way anyway, but COVID sped it up. But also it got rid of a lot of these small companies like these. And some of these companies, I'm sure were perfectly fine, but if you were a company that was kind of on the edge, and Steve and I were talking about this afternoon before we got on, if you were a company that was on the edge, COVID sort of acted like a forest fire. So, in the East Coast, you guys have toll booths and stuff. Out here, we have forest fires, and we had a couple this fall, and forest fires are terrible when they're happening, but then when they're over, they're not bad because they get rid of a lot of the old stuff, the dead stuff that was clogging up the room, and what it does is, yes, it helps the big guys maybe, but what it really does is it helps sort of those new companies, right? For an entrepreneur, right now is a great time to get into the freight business or into the warehousing business because a lot of that sort of dead wood, that middle class is gone. And we had a lot of sort of zombie fleets and companies floating around, I think, at the end of last year. And COVID has sort of cleared it out and hopefully made a lot of room for sort of new business to grow and, sort of smarter, more targeted strategic business that'll maybe hopefully fill a need that we're going to obviously have going forward as the need and demand for trucks increases. Steve, I don't know if you wanted to say anything before I flipped over to the next piece here.
Now, the only thing about this that I've been thinking a lot about is what the middle mile is going to look like. Because final mile is getting dialed in pretty well. And it seems like some big folks are taking care of the freight from, DC to DC. But that middle mile, it's getting, or from factory to DC. But getting from DC to DC, that middle mile is going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see who fills the need. And maybe it's Amazon, maybe it's e-commerce companies. But, that's one of the things that I've been keeping my eye on from this standpoint for some time now.
Well, I mean, the headline at the top of this slide says that UPS just got out of the middle mile.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, who's going to take it up? That's the thing I'm thinking about.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe drop shipping will come back and we can stop worrying about it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, because the thing is, if you think about it, the final mile is complicated but solvable. Pricing out that middle mile is the challenge, and it's reallocating based on this slide and everything we've seen, reallocating capacity to be able to handle it. So anyway, just two cents that I've been thinking about.
No, yeah, absolutely. All right, so I'll keep moving on. By the way, feel free to jump in with questions at any time. I know we have like 12 minutes left, so if anybody wants to jump in at any point, we're happy to answer it. And just to get ahead of what I'm sure the first question will be, no, I didn't call Steve this morning and say, hey, let's both wear Under Armour zip-ups for our talk. That's just the product of us having the same dorky professor fashion sense, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I didn't even realize until about 5 minutes ago we had the same shirt on. All right. This is something I think it's interesting. So now we're going to start talking about some of the creative solutions, and we'll go through these quickly so we can get to future predictions, I guess. I do think it's interesting, so what's the fallout of there not being enough warehouse space? So one of those things has been, dark stores, Macy's, Walmart, whole bunch of companies now are shutting down stores, turning them into fulfillment centers. This Macy's is not too far from where I live. This is in Littleton, Colorado. It's a suburb of kind of southwest of Denver. And there's a Macy's as part of the mall there, and you can't go into that Macy's anymore. But they'll send something to your house, and that's partly because, like we just showed you with all that low warehouse capacity and high price. Okay, what if you're not Amazon? What if you're not a company that's doing great right now, like say Macy's, but you still want to capitalize on this demand? You're seeing a lot more stuff like this, and how this impacts the demand for warehousing, I think will be really interesting. Now, we haven't seen enough of this happening to make much of a dent yet, but I do think it'll be interesting to see how many firms, especially the big box guys, try to go to something like this, or even like a mixed situation where Target, if you walk in the back of a Target right now, they have their inventory, coming in, the inbound inventory, and they have lanes where some stuff is going straight onto the floor, and some stuff is going to a holding area that's just for e-commerce, and some's going to a middle sort of pool area where it could go on the floor or go to e-commerce, and sort of either one is fine. By the way, those two systems don't talk to each other that well. I drove to like 5 or 6 Targets around the week before Christmas, looking for an animatronic baby Yoda for an 8-year-old that lives at my house. And even though a lot of them said they had it, they didn't. It's because they don't have the abilities yet, really, for the store to talk to the online folks. And it was a cold day of driving through Colorado, and no one ended up with the baby Yoda at my house. We also see, of course, warehouses are getting bigger. There's more sort of mail drop off. This picture I love, by the way. Remember we showed that picture from Singles Day a minute ago. How do you deal with $75 billion of orders? Well, by counting this as a delivery is one of the ways apparently you do it. All of these these are on-time delivery, but you can see they don't fit into the lockers. So it just, we'll throw them on the ground. And, hopefully the right guy will come and find these. I'm sure no one is just going to stop by and pick one of these boxes up. You see stuff like, drone delivery, parking garages turning into fulfillment centers, all kinds of crazy stuff that I think is really interesting and really creative, mostly happening just because there's nowhere to put it. We can't rely on these sort of traditional metrics anymore. And so we've seen a bunch of really fun, I think, interesting stuff, at least if you're a dork for supply chain like me, really kind of fun stuff to look at and seeing how companies are trying to deal with this big spike in capacity. Okay, so we got 8 minutes left. So one of the things we should look at is sort of what we see for the future. So we always ask our respondents, where do you see this going in 12 months? And these are our responses for January 21st, and I think they're really interesting because they sort of back up some of what we've been saying. So first off, prices are going to be high across the board. Inventory costs over the next year in 81. Warehousing prices over the next year, 83. Transportation prices over the next year, 79.9. So right about at 80, all three of them. That's significant rates of price growth kind of across the board. At the same time, while we are predicted to get more capacity for transportation, right? It's a 61.5. So that is, we're going to be building trucks. I mean, we're already seeing record orders for fleets at the end of last year. We're building trucks. We're building capacity as quickly as we can. Warehousing capacity 52, basically. Remember, 50 is no growth. So essentially, even though we're going to be building warehouses as fast as we can build them, we're not going to be caught up to what we need. Demand is so far exceeding supply right now. And again, remember what we said a half hour ago. E-commerce, the demand for sort of, and the sort of demand that goes along with that for logistics infrastructure grew 3 months, or grew 3 years and 9 months. It's going to take a really long time for us to catch up. And so we see that over the next year, there's not going to be a ton of relief in terms of the cost of logistics services. And Steve can speak to this. Our future predictions have been pretty on point, the ones that we've gotten from our respondents so far, right?
Yeah, we looked at, I think, at 3 different periods of time dating back to 2018 or 2019 when we started doing the comparison. You know, from that point, I think it was September, it could have been August, but 1 year ago, their predictions of where it was going to be in terms of the level, and they were about, I mean, within a point each time, and this trend continued. So, you know, you take the fact that these numbers and these data all indicate something to happen, so a leading indicator. You take the accuracy with which the crowd is actually predicting what's going to happen a year from now. This all points to a tool to diagnose the headwinds, I think, in my mind. And Zach, we've actually got a question for you about Baby Yoda from another one of my students. Hey, Ansel. He wants to know, how easy is it for a company to convert from a classic mall setup to a warehouse fulfillment center? Probably a lot of issues, right?
Oh, absolutely. So Ansel, one of the things it is difficult, but it's easier now than it's ever been. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is because of how scalable everything has gotten in terms of technology. So it's easy to, you know, open up a bigger AWS account, get some processing power in, some sort of modular warehouse management system, hopefully that you can just plug in to whatever the one is you had already. Maybe you're doing automation, although if you're just converting a mall store over, I'm guessing automation is not going to happen right away. And from there, essentially, it's just bringing a lot of inventory forward and staging shipping lanes. You know, a lot of these places had inbound docks already. Now you just designate one outbound, essentially, or maybe even do what a lot of these companies are doing is an Uberization style, where you basically, the same way that anyone can sign up to do Uber Eats, you could sign up to deliver deliver orders to people's houses. Just say, okay, I want to deliver for Amazon or Walmart.com or whatever. I want to deliver for 3 hours in this neighborhood. And they say, okay, 3 hours is about however many boxes. Maybe you're doing 10 boxes an hour, maybe. So we'll give you 30 boxes and go ahead and drive around, and an app on your phone will just start taking you everywhere. So, Ansel, you're absolutely right. There is a cost involved with it, but clearly it's something where the cost to switch these places over to fulfillment centers is less than what we think can be gained by these, or like what Macy's or whoever's doing this thinks can be gained by these in terms of the increase in the number of sales. And especially if you're like an anchor store in a mall, no one is going to malls right now. You know, even even if some people are going, you're never going to get that sort of critical mass that you need where it makes sense to have 20 people walking around the men's shoes part of the store. And so you got to figure out something to do. And so, yeah, it takes a lot, but it's more scalable now than it's ever been before. And clearly they think it's worth it to do that. That's a really interesting question. The other thing I want to point you towards on this future readings is this table down here at the bottom. And if you look at inventory levels, I think it's really interesting. Every month we divide our respondents up to downstream, upstream. Upstream predicted a 15% higher rate of growth for inventory levels over the next year. And so downstream means like retailers close to the consumer. Upstream would be like manufacturers, wholesalers, 3PLs. All those folks predicted 15% higher rates of inventory levels over the next year. And so I think that helps to give you some further color as to what's happening here, and tells you a little bit about where the real crunch on capacity is going to be. So if I'm an upstream company, wholesaler, manufacturer, warehousing is probably going to be even tighter. On the other side, transportation will probably be tighter on downstream. All right, so we got some key takeaways, but also I want to open it up to any questions anybody has as we kind of go through this. I know we only have like 2 minutes left here, and I don't want to keep anybody too long. And also, I'm supposed to take a kid to dance in about 3 minutes. So let's, I guess we can do our takeaways. Inventory's building up like crazy. We have slowdowns on the American side and the Chinese side. It's driving up prices, and capacity is going to be really slow to catch up. And I don't even think we'll catch up over the next 12 months. Steve, do you want to throw anything in for our takeaways here?
Strap in. It's going to get interesting, as it has been. That's where I'm at.
Yeah. All right. So that's kind of it for what we have. Are there any questions or anything that anybody would like to talk about before we get out of here today? I appreciate all you guys giving us time to come and talk to you. This is always fun for us. So I hope everybody got something out of it. And if anyone has any questions, we'd love to hear them.
I think some of my students will get extra credit, so they'll definitely get something out of it.
All right.
That was a great discussion. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That's a great topic. It's something actually we have not had a presentation on that, I believe. And so the information was fantastic that came out tonight.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having us. This is a great time.
Okay, we do have a question from Ansel.
Okay. Is there any way we can escape the critical threshold you mentioned with warehousing space?
Build more warehouses would be the first answer.
Go up?
Yeah, more warehouses. So, one of the things you can do, Ansel, is you can have creative solutions like omni-channel centers, dark stores, pop-ups, things like that. And it'll be a lot easier to do too once people can go back into stores, and hopefully we can move some activity back into the brick and mortar side and away from the sort of pure play e-commerce side.
Thank you. Do you have any last minute closing comments before we sign off?
Just one more thing, the-lmi.com. Every month a new report pops up, and you can take a look at all the previous ones there too. There you go, Zach. There's the website.
Yeah, here's the website, and if you're interested, in joining our respondent base, and you think that you're confident about, saying, hey, our transportation prices going up or down, send us a note. We're always happy to add people to the respondent base, and this is literally no cost. This is not a sales pitch. I mean, obviously we'd like you to read it, but we send it out for free the first Tuesday every month, and we're just happy to get more information and to sort of build up what we're doing and get a better big picture thing.
Thank you very much. Actually, what I'll do is I'll put your website into the I usually send out a little thank you to everybody with their continuing education credit and a copy of the recording. So what I will do is I'll actually list this link in the email that goes out to anybody, and if they want to join, I'll have them contact me, and then I'll refer the information over to you so they can join being a respondent to the report.
That would be great.
Okay, great. Okay, well, I know our time is closing right now. We're at the end of the hour. And I just wanted to thank Zach and Steve for this presentation. As I said, it was actually it's nice to see the numbers. We've been hearing a lot of different types of presentations, probably sometime last year, about some of the information you're talking about. But it's nice to actually see the real data out there, and I really appreciate you all coming and coming to the Rochester group to present this today. And, thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
having us.
Okay, have a good
Happy
night,
to, maybe we'll come
everybody.
back next year and hopefully tell you a happier story about prices.
We definitely would love to get an update, definitely.
Sounds good. All right,
Okay, thank you
thanks.
so much.
Have a good
Bye-bye,
night.
everybody.
Bye. Good night.